Should you read Go for Beginners? Stay tuned to find out. Hi, I'm Jonathan Hall, and I'm on a mission to find the best book to read to learn Go in 2023. That's why I recently went on Amazon.com and bought 6 books, and I've recently found a few others. So I'm reading through each one and creating a review to give you the answer, which is the best book to read in 2023 to learn Go. If you aren't already subscribed, be sure to hit that button so you get notified when the other reviews and the final conclusion video comes out. And if you like this video, be sure to hit the like button. Let's jump in and see if you should be reading Go for Beginners. So after the last 2 books I reviewed, I was a little bit apprehensive when I realized this book was self-published because the last 2 books were so full of either technical or grammatical errors. I kind of felt like they were self-published and didn't have an editor. Fortunately, that didn't turn out to be a big problem with this book. I was also excited about the book because I love the subtitle. It says, A Genius Guide to Go Programming. The very first book I reviewed in this series was called For Dummies. And I've never really liked the For Dummies or For Idiots name, but I've always wished that there was a For Geniuses series of books for those of us who, we maybe already have a solid grasp on programming and we want to jump into something new. I would love a book on, say, React development for geniuses that doesn't pretend I know nothing about software development. Kind of just takes me down the path of what I need that's different from other languages. So I was hopeful that might be this book. Let's dive in and see how it pans out. So from the introduction of the book, author Edward Thornton tells us that he's writing this book for professional software developers. I think that's in line with the subtitle and with my hopes that this will be a book for people like me, if I didn't already know Go. Now, the book is written in a fairly direct, to-the-point manner, which I appreciate. I think it's in line with that for a genius guide sort of approach. It really doesn't pad the material too much. It's not too fluffy. If you're a really beginner to programming, that is probably going to be a turnoff for you. I don't think this book is intended for you. This book is intended for professional software developers. So if you're already have several years experience with Java or Python or some other language, this book could be a good fit. So I really like the prose style, the narration style in this book. I feel like it's talking at my level. I've been a software developer for my entire career, for 2 or 3 decades, really. So, I do feel like this is a good introduction to a new language in that sense. It talks at my level. I don't feel like I'm being spoken down to. I don't feel like it's confusing me. I think this book is organized in a pretty logical way. The very first chapter is just a really high-level introduction to the Go language, sort of the goals of the language and maybe why you might want to learn it. And then it dives into the fundamentals of the language. From there, it sort of builds on identifiers, file names, keywords, data types, all the normal stuff you expect in a book about a new language. The chapter on fundamentals does a really good job of explaining a bunch of Go concepts concisely and mostly accurately. The only concern I really have about that beginning section is it might be a little bit too abstract and too quick, but that's probably outweighed by the fact that this book is for professionals and that it then goes into greater detail later on in the book. So you're not going to read that fundamentals section, the first couple chapters, and really be able to use Go very effectively yet. But that's okay. It's sort of, I would say it's trying to give you the hooks that you can attach the rest of the knowledge in the book to. And so if you take it in that way, I think it's appropriate. It's also a really short chapter. So, you're going to get through it quickly, and then you can start getting to the meat of the matter to sort of hang on onto those hooks, if you will. So then after talking about the fundamentals then, the remaining chapters start to go into the greater detail about control structures, functions, composite data types, all the other highly relevant stuff. And then the very last chapter is pretty short, and it's a chapter that goes over some useful patterns and some common pitfalls that people frequently find in Go. It's kind of I would say a random collection of sort of tips that in other books are often maybe sort of sidebars within the main text. Maybe it's nicer to have that at the end. I don't really have an opinion on that. Let's talk about the content. So I enjoyed reading this book. I didn't read it cover to cover, but I read parts of most chapters. As I alluded to earlier, the content is written at a level I appreciate it. I feel like it's written to me, a professional developer. It's not written to a university student or somebody who's a hobbyist. It's really written for a professional developer. And it does a really good job of covering the important Go topics, including the ever elusive testing package. But it does cover them quickly. This is not an in-depth book. It's only 208 pages, so you don't expect a ton of detail in a book this size, but it does get to the point quickly and talk to you about the important stuff. I would say the biggest gap in this book is one that I've seen repeated throughout the others, many of the others, and that is the coverage of Go modules. So this book was published in August of 2021, and that was literally a week before Go 1.17 came out. But Go modules were introduced in 2018 with Go 1.11, and they were made the default in Go 1.14 in 2020. So this book is a year and a half after Go modules were the default, and it doesn't talk about Go modules. So it's pretty sad, I think. It's a big missing piece here, and kind of surprising, honestly. Other than that, another common theme that we see throughout these books is it doesn't talk about generics, but that's also expected considering how new generics are, and they didn't exist yet when this book came out. So again, understandable, not a criticism, not a complaint to the author, but it is unfortunate if you're trying to learn Go in 2023 because you want to learn generics too. And then one thing that is missing, but it's not a problem in this book does not talk about the HTTP package or writing REST APIs or anything like that. It doesn't claim that it does, so that's fine. I don't think it's a problem, but some of the other books do, so just be aware of that. This is really an introduction to the Go language. It's not really a guide to building applications, and I think that's fine. I think that's appropriate. Just be aware of that. Don't be surprised. Don't buy this book expecting to have detailed examples about writing a web API when they're not there. It's a book about the Go language. Once you've read this book, you would then decide how to apply that, whether you're building a CLI tool or a web API or something like that. And maybe you wanted an additional book or other online materials to help you with that. But this doesn't cover that, and that's fine, in my opinion. Now, the last thing I want to mention about content, because I don't really know where else to mention this, is the biggest drawback to this book, and that is the code samples. The code samples in this book are just horribly formatted. They are not written in a monotype font. They're not even indented. Let me just show you what I'm talking about here. So you can see here that the code formatting is, in my view, ugly. Most important, it's hard to read. The lack of indentation is the biggest problem, and the fact that it's not in a monotype font makes it a little bit awkward. I think it's the same font as the rest of the code. Maybe it's a couple point sizes smaller. Honestly, this is a big drawback, in my opinion. It makes the book very difficult to read in terms of the code samples. The text of the book is fine. The descriptions are great, but the code samples are just so hard to read. If the author would fix that one thing, if they would republish this with reformatted code samples, I would give it a much better rating. I mean, that's at least a full star rating lost right there on my Amazon review just for that, because it makes the code so hard to read. And for a book about coding, that's really a shame. Let's move on to accuracy. So I did find a number of minor inaccuracies in this book, but it's really pretty good, especially considering that this is, I assume, a solo project. It's self-published. Maybe the author hired an editor or someone to review it, but I'm assuming that he did most of this work on his own. He did a really good job of being accurate. Most of the inaccuracies I found were not big deals. For example, I found a typo with some curly braces reversed accidentally in a code example. Not a big deal. You can clearly tell what the code means, even though it's wrong. And just an example, it's a nitpick, but one technically inaccurate thing the book says, just as an example, on page 193, the book says, quote, "You can't use the opening brace," a little squiggly, "on a line by itself." Then it shows a short code example, and it's true in that code example. It's showing an example of a function declaration, and it's true that you can't do func, the function name, and variable parameters, and then the curly brace on the line by itself. So in that context, it's true. However, there are contexts where you can have the opening brace on a line by itself, namely in a code block. So the wording is technically wrong, but in context, it's correct, or at least makes sense. So there's a few things like that are not going to be a big deal. They're not going to trip up most people, but they're not technically correct. So I realize that's really a nitpick. Take it for what it's worth. We're getting close to the end. Let's talk about the physical characteristics. I think you can see as I'm holding this, it's not a big book, neither in terms of page count nor page size. It's fairly narrow. It is an attractive book. It's easy to read. The font is easy to read except for the code samples. The pages are a little bit narrow. It's not really a big deal, but it gives the book a sense of being short. And I think that's okay because it's the whole sort of idea is it's a genius guide. It's for professional developers who want to get into Go quickly. You probably want a short book for that. So I think that's okay. I think the book does a pretty good job in that sense of living up to the subtitle, to the expectation it sets, being for the professional developers, but it's not an in-depth guide. So in conclusion, I really want to like and I want to recommend this book. It has a lot going for it. It's not nearly as in-depth as Learning Go by John Bodner, which I reviewed previously, but that can be a strength too. If you want a quicker introduction to Go than that book, this one has a lot to offer you. Really, the biggest drawback, again, is the way the code is formatted so poorly. It's so hard to read. That really is a big drawback, and the outdated information about dependency management and lack of discussion of Go modules is a drawback. So those two things combined mean I would probably give this 2, maybe 3 stars on Amazon.com. If the author would just republish with fixed formatting, I would jump to 4 stars easily. And if he would update the dependency management, add this topic about generics, I would love to give this a future version of this book a 5-star rating on Amazon. Bottom line, if you are an experienced programmer and you want a quick introduction to Go, and you're not put off by bad formatting of code, this could be a good book for you. So there you have it. Go for Beginners, a genius guide to Go programming. I hope you will subscribe so you get the notification when my new recommendations come out. I'm getting close to the end of my recommendation list, and I'm going to give you the final recommendation, which book you should read to learn Go in 2023. Let me also do a quick shout out to my daily mailing list. Every day, every weekday, I write a quick email about the Go language. You can sign up at boldlygo.tech/daily. And right now I'm going through the entire Go spec and explaining it in easy to understand terms. So if you have been intimidated by the Go specification, you shouldn't be. But my email series on this will help you be less intimidated by the Go specification. boldlygo.tech/daily. Sign up. I'd love to see you there.